The Lost City of Atlantis, a story so spectacular that it still piques our interest today. But is this a tale rooted in reality? Is there a lost city to be found, or is it just a metaphorical story? And what is it about these stories that interest us? Deep down, do we know that there's parts of human history that have been forgotten? Are there ancestral memories that we no longer have access to? Well, to find out, let's hop in a time machine and teleport ourselves back to the year 360 BC, the time where Plato, the great Greek philosopher, first heard the story of the Lost City of Atlantis. And the story he told was a fascinating one. An advanced civilization that could sail and trade around the world, amassing wealth that was beyond belief. But over time, their civilization became cruel, corrupt, and greedy, causing them to fall out of harmony with the universe. The gods saw their behavior and sent cataclysmic floods to completely wipe them off the planet. It all sounds like something you would read out of a fantasy novel. A story so unbelievably epic that it couldn't have possibly have been real. But what if it was? And what if the story of Atlantis is even more mind-blowing than we could have ever imagined? This is how our planet looks today. An oasis in an otherwise uninhabited part of the universe. Everything we've known, everything our parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents have known has happened on an Earth that looks exactly like this. But 11,600 years ago, when Atlantis was said to have existed, this is how our planet looked. Ice sheets 2 miles high, covering many of the places that we recognize today. And it was 11,600 years ago that many of those ice sheets suddenly melted. And when that much ice melts, you can only imagine the biblically sized floods that would have washed over the world. Floods that would without a doubt wipe out even our technologically advanced society today. So is it crazy to think that these global floods might have drowned out a chapter of human history? Well, in many ways, it literally did, because very quickly, the oceans rose more than 400 feet due to the melting ice. The coastlines, the most precious real estate on Earth, was sunken beneath the water, and along with it, the traces of any civilizations that might have lived near the ocean. So just imagine for a second if the sea rose another 400 feet today. What would it look like? Well, the entire state of Florida would be completely gone. Houston, Philadelphia, NYC, LA, would all be completely beneath the waves. Some of our society's greatest accomplishments would be at the bottom of the ocean. So maybe stories like the Lost City of Atlantis captivate us because we know deep down there's more to our history that's been forgotten. It hasn't been a linear line of progression. It's been a rocky one, with entire chapters lost, great civilizations destroyed, and the knowledge that they had gained forgotten forever. Now, pinpointing an exact location for any lost city is gonna be difficult, but surprisingly, there's 2 really interesting theories on the exact location of Atlantis. The first theory comes from the geologist Randall Carlson, who broke down Plato's account of Atlantis line for line. And what he discovered was that Plato wasn't describing the Atlanteans as people who could harness crystal energies and teleport, but rather an Ice Age civilization that could sail, trade, and navigate the world's oceans much earlier than we had originally thought, which led him to one very specific place as the most likely location of Atlantis, the Azores Plateau, an island that would have been above water 11,600 years ago that sits just off the coast of Europe. And what's wild is that there's evidence the Azores had sunk right around the time that Atlantis was destroyed. So was Plato making this whole thing up, or does his timeline just so happen to occur at the same time as a worldwide cataclysm that changed the Earth forever? Well, Jimmy Corsetti, the man in which our second theory comes from, wouldn't say it was a coincidence at all. In fact, he goes even a step further and claims to have found the exact location of the Lost City of Atlantis using satellite imagery. Welcome to the Mauritanian desert, a place that seems like it's been absent of life for millions of years. But in this endless ocean of sand lies potentially the greatest discovery in history. The Rakat structure, as it's formerly known, is so massive it can be seen from space. In fact, it was only discovered in 1965 when astronauts were the first ones to spot the strange circle, calling it Eye of the Sahara. But really, what makes this place so strange is that it just so happens to match tons of Plato's descriptions of Atlantis, a city made up of concentric circles with an opening to the sea to the south, mountains to the north, and red, black, and white colored stone throughout. Now, those are pretty interesting coincidences, but take an even closer look and you'll find salt, lots of salt, indicating that at one point this was all underwater. So let's not imagine the Mauritania of today, but instead let's imagine the Mauritania that existed 11,600 years ago, a time when Africa was lush and green, and a river ran just north of the structure. The area would have been a perfect little place for a thriving civilization to call home, a cradle of humanity that might have nurtured the Atlanteans themselves. But even though the Rakat seems like it really could be the location of Atlantis, it has one major flaw. It wouldn't have been underwater 11,600 years ago. In fact, it hasn't been underwater for millions of years. But both of these theories leave us with one curious clue that leads back to the greatest ancient civilization of all time, ancient Egypt. A group of people who left behind the greatest monuments on Earth, who achieved things that even today we struggle to comprehend. And they're also the ones who left us with the story of Atlantis. In fact, the story of Atlantis comes from the very origin story of the ancient Egyptians themselves, who spoke of a great primordial mound that was surrounded by water and one day was struck down and sunken by the universe. The survivors made their way to Egypt to create their new motherland, and the ancient Egyptians referred to these survivors as gods, who brought with them the knowledge of civilization. So the question still remains, why are we so interested in these stories? Well, maybe because they aren't all metaphors and fiction, and rather what we're looking at is an account of real things that happened, a record of ancient history. Despite cataclysms, floods, earthquakes, and fire, our ancestors knew the importance of storytelling, and they tried their best to pass down human history's most important events. Events like the Lost City of Atlantis that over time have become completely blurred, with people suggesting they had energy weapons or lived under the water like mermaids, when really they might have been trying to pass down the fascinating tale of how ancient Egypt came to be. And what's even more interesting are the beliefs about life and death that the ancient Egyptians claim to have inherited from these gods. Beliefs like the judgment scene, where upon death your heart will be weighed, and if it's heavier than a feather and you lived a useless, greedy, terrible life, your soul would face total annihilation, the ability to experience loss forever, and your soul erased from the memory of the universe. All the ones who decided this were the masters of the dead, who judged a life based on how full or empty it was. And here's a quote from the Egyptian Book of the Dead that says what these masters looked for. When the story is written and the end is good, when the soul of a man is perfected, with a great shout, they lift him into the heavens. The Egyptians put so much importance on the story of a life. Did you put on a spectacular performance for the universe? Or did you waste the opportunity away, achieving so much less than what you were capable of? Now ask the ancient Egyptians where they came up with these complicated spiritual beliefs, and they'd tell you Zeb Tepi, or the first time when the gods first arrived in Egypt. So when we put together the stories of Atlantis and the origins of Egypt, they almost fit together like a puzzle piece. A time in history that's often simplified, but was likely much more complicated than we could ever imagine. A time where a great seafaring civilization went extinct, passing down their knowledge to the Egyptians, who adopted their belief systems, expanded on it, and created the greatest wonder the world has ever seen. So the big question, is the Lost City of Atlantis real? Well, I think it's a real memory of a very important point in history. A story so important, it was written down and preserved for thousands of years, in the hopes of remembering one chapter in human history that was lost, and another chapter that was just beginning. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, I'll see you guys soon.